But I'm now joined, I'm very pleased to be joined, by a personal friend of the President's and a member of the Democratic National Committee of California, Bob Mulholland. Mr. Mulholland, thank you so much for joining me. Your President, President Joe Biden's track record in the 1980s of trying to stop extradition treaties didn't make him seem very tough on the IRA back then. Why should we now think he's so committed to peace in Northern Ireland, not arguing for a unified Ireland?
Well, that you give the assumption that the UK was on the right side of that issue. Fortunately, President Clinton come up with the Good Friday Agreement, and we've had some years, 25 years of calmness. Look at, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Wilson said to President Johnson when he called about Vietnam, no thanks, we're staying out of that. But, and that was the right decision by Prime Minister Wilson, but it didn't mean that we didn't have a special relationship, which was coined by Winston Churchill in 1946. Hey, I'll just add that it was Prime Minister Tony Blair, when he was Prime Minister, that announced the last check was going to America to pay off the World War II loan. I think the UK was the only one to pay off that loan. So it is a special relationship.
But doesn't the US have special relationships with so many countries, whereas we have one? So, I mean, the US relationship with Israel is very important. The US relationship with Ireland is very important, whereas the UK has a single special relationship. So it's a different proportion from your side.
Well, yes, we almost speak the same language, and that's helpful. The Queen that passed away recently was a big factor for that. Much of the American people loved her, and it is true that there is many millions of Irish Americans, but there's also millions of German Americans. I just think, given the history of the potato famine to now, and I was born and grew up in Philadelphia, and when I was there recently, I was at the dock and I saw this big plaque about the Irish landing there, the potato famine. And my grandparents come from Ireland, Northern Ireland, so there's millions of Americans. And I would disagree with you a little bit that President Biden is going to Ireland because of his election. I think, given that we, America, paid a big place in the Good Friday Agreement, this is an acknowledgement of the role we did. Just like President Clinton got an agreement with Israel and Jordan, just like President Carter got an agreement between Israel and Egypt. All this counts. But yes, America does have relationships with a lot of countries, but it is a special one with the UK.
And it's important in NATO, and the US and UK have worked very closely together, but I just wonder whether we get too sentimental about it, that it is a relationship of mutual self-interest that works when our self-interests coincide, but actually doesn't when it doesn't, and it doesn't lead to special treatment for the UK. For example, we're not at any immediate prospect of getting a free trade deal with the US.
Yeah, good luck with that. Look, even in our Congress, we have two different parties, and we look like an LA freeway changing lanes all the time. So that's normal. The most important factor is that we, since in 1783, the King of England said, okay, you're going to get independence. We've kept a relationship, and we've had our differences. In fact, the British came over in the War of 1812 and tried to burn down the White House and our capital. But we forgave you, and we're continuing our relationship.
Indeed, and the White House was painted white as a result of the singeing, I think, that it got in 1812. But the special relationship today, I just wonder whether that is still overstated, that it's not to say there aren't commonalities, but it's that American politics is, for very good reasons, much more domestically focused than it is foreign affairs focused, and that you wouldn't really expect a foreign country to rank in American electoral politics.
Correct, and I was disappointed at the Tories in '92 when they were trying to interfere with Bill Clinton's time at Oxford. I was in the Prime Minister's office once. Tony Blair was there. I was his office, but he wasn't there. And I looked over and I saw three phones. One was to Dublin, one was to Moscow, and one was to Washington, D.C. So I saw that as an important relationship, and I assume those phones are still there.
Well, I don't know whether they do it that way, but I believe the telephone in the cabinet war rooms was still connected to the White House 40 years after the war rooms had been locked up. So the telephones aren't necessarily used as often as they might be. But I want to come back to this visit of President Biden, because American presidents do make a habit of going to Ireland before an election. There was the great visit by President Obama when he said he was from the famous Irish Obama family, which I thought at least joked about the reality of using a visit to Ireland for electoral purposes.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Look, the only thing that's different is the Secret Service got to drive on the left-hand side of the road. Actually, the presidents usually close the roads. But President, I'm old enough to know remember President Kennedy's visit to Ireland. And it had a big impact on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think that's important. We're friends. We will always be friends. And let's remain and keep that special relationship.
And I absolutely agree that we're friends and that we have similar constitutional evolution. We have similar respect for the law. It's really the extent to which it's overstated, and that we in the UK cannot expect US politics to change for our convenience. And actually, the Falklands is a very good example of this. The State Department did not want to support the UK in 1982, and we were very lucky that Caspar Weinberger took a different view.
Yes, I remember that war, and ultimately President Reagan actually even provided refueling of your airplanes, because it was a long way to the Falkland Islands. And I've been to Labour Party conferences in Brighton, and I've stopped at the table, the Falklands table. So that was a debate in American politics, but it worked out well. Maggie Thatcher, I guess, probably talked to President Reagan and worked it out. Falkland Islands has been quiet ever since. Northern Ireland's been great since the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes, though unfortunately we haven't got the restoration of power sharing, which is, I think, one of the great disappointments about the 25th anniversary, that one of the main parts of the architecture of the peace process is currently absent.
Yeah, and I think, one of the parties always playing hardball, and maybe that'll change after I think it's May elections. And, I've been in politics for over 50 years, and I understand that. You have to have a variety of conversations. You have to talk in ways that doesn't alienate one group. I think that ultimately they'll be back in with the government in Belfast.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Mulholland. We're very grateful for your 50 years of experience being shared with us this evening, so thank you for joining me.